Welcome to Sunny's Mindset Lab podcast. Today, we're exploring The Pleasure Trap by Douglas J. Lisle and Alan Goldhamer. This book explains how modern environments hijack our brain's pleasure systems and how that affects our health, behavior, and happiness. Thank you, Sunny. The Pleasure Trap is about understanding how our evolutionary wiring interacts with modern life and why recognizing this interaction is essential for long-term health and well-being.
That sounds fascinating. To help our listeners follow along, it looks like we've mapped out a clear path for today's discussion. We'll start by defining what you call the modern paradox, then dive into our ancient operating system and see how that system gets hijacked. After that, we'll explore the trap's wider influence and, most importantly, talk about how to engineer an escape and find what you call true north. Perfect. So let's start at the beginning with Section 1, the modern paradox. What is this core problem you're trying to frame here?
Well, it's really centered on that very question. We live in a world of incredible abundance. We have more wealth, more technology, more comfort, and more food available than at any point in human history. And yet, if you look around, people are struggling. We're seeing epidemic levels of chronic disease, fatigue, and general unhappiness. This contradiction is the modern paradox. Our external world has improved dramatically, but our internal well-being has, in many ways, declined.
That's a powerful point, and I see you've included a quote here from Dr. John McDougall. People love to hear good news about their bad habits. How does that psychological tendency play into this paradox?
It's absolutely central to it. Because we're uncomfortable, we look for easy answers, we want to be told that the problem isn't our lifestyle, that there's a quick fix, a pill, or a new fad that will solve everything without requiring difficult changes. This desire for good news makes us incredibly vulnerable to the very traps that modern life sets for us, because these traps always promise pleasure and ease up front.
So you're saying there's a fundamental mismatch. Can you break down the difference between the environment we evolved in and the one we live in now? Of course. For nearly all of human history, we lived as hunter-gatherers. That environment was defined by three key things: caloric scarcity, natural whole foods, and constant physical effort just to survive. Our biology is brilliantly adapted to that world, but the modern environment is the complete opposite. We have caloric abundance, hyper-palatable processed foods everywhere, and our daily lives require almost no physical effort. This mismatch is the root cause of what were once called the diseases of kings, illnesses of excess that are now common for everyone. Our ancient hardware is running on completely foreign modern software.
That makes so much sense. It sounds like to really understand the problem, we need to understand that ancient hardware, as you put it. This brings us to your concept of our ancient operating system. What is that exactly?
At the core of our behavior, and really the behavior of almost all living things, is a simple but powerful set of instructions we call the motivational triad. It's not something we think about, it's the hardwired, instinctual programming that has guided survival and reproduction for millions of years.
And what are those three drives?
They are remarkably simple. First, seek pleasure. Second, avoid pain. And third, conserve energy. Every action we take is, at its root, an attempt to fulfill one or more of these directives. Our brain is constantly calculating how to get the most pleasure and the least pain for the absolute minimum effort. This is the path of least resistance, and it's built into our very nature.
Can you give us an example of how this plays out in the natural world, where it works as intended? A great example from the book is the male gray shrike. To attract a mate, which is the ultimate expression of seeking pleasure and passing on its genes, the bird has to gather resources. It does so as efficiently as possible, conserving energy. At the same time, it has to be constantly aware of predators, which is the avoid pain or avoid death drive. The entire process is a beautiful, unconscious balancing act of the triad, all working in harmony to ensure survival and success.
So this motivational triad is an elegant and effective system that has worked for eons, which leads to the big question: where did things go wrong for us? How does this ancient system get hijacked in the modern world? This is the absolute core of the book. We call it the pleasure trap. It's what happens when our motivational triad encounters artificial stimuli that don't exist in nature, things like highly processed foods, drugs, or even certain media. These things provide a supernormal reward signal to the brain. The pleasure hit is so intense, far greater than from any natural source, that it hijacks the system. Our brain interprets this intense pleasure as a sign of something that is critically important for survival, even when it's actually causing harm. It tricks us into self-destructive behavior.
That's a chilling idea. Do you have an example of someone discovering this hijacking process in real time?
We do. A stark example is Sigmund Freud's early experience with cocaine. When he first tried it, the pleasure was so overwhelming that he thought he had discovered a miracle drug, a sort of magic button for human happiness. But he very quickly learned that this supernormal pleasure was a devastating trap. It hijacked the seek pleasure drive so powerfully that it led to addiction and ruin. It was a brutal lesson in how our instincts can be turned against us.
So what's happening in our brains and bodies on a biological level that makes this trap so powerful?
The mechanism is called neuroadaptation. Our sensory systems are designed to adapt to their environment. When you constantly expose your taste buds to the hyperconcentrated sugar, salt, and fat in processed foods, your nerves adapt to that high level of stimulation. The bar gets raised. As a result, natural foods like an apple or a carrot start to taste bland and unappealing. You begin to crave that artificial intensity just to feel a normal level of pleasure. You're biologically hooked.
Wow, so it's not just a psychological trick, it's a physical adaptation. And you mentioned this isn't just about food, so let's talk about what you call the trap's wider web. How else does this dynamic show up in our lives?
A perfect example is in modern medicine. There are two potential goals. The first is the healing goal, to find the root cause of an illness and remove it. The second is the pain relief goal, to just mask the symptoms, usually with medication. The avoid pain part of our motivational triad makes the second option incredibly appealing. But taking a pill to silence a headache, for instance, is a trap. Pain is a vital warning signal. By masking it, we ignore the underlying problem and allow it to fester, all for the sake of short-term comfort.
And what about social pressures? How do they fit into this web? Humans are profoundly social animals. The need to belong and conform is a powerful, ancient survival instinct. The famous Milgram experiment showed this in a dramatic way. They proved that most people will obey an authority figure and conform to the group, even if it means violating their own moral judgment. This creates a social trap. When the normal behavior in our culture is unhealthy, eating processed foods, being sedentary, our deep-seated need to conform keeps us stuck, making it incredibly difficult to break away, even when we know better.
I remember hearing about that experiment. The results were just shocking, weren't they?
They were staggering. A full 65% of participants were willing to administer what they believed was a lethal 450-volt shock to another person, simply because a man in a lab coat told them to continue. If social pressure is that powerful, imagine how hard it is to say, no, thank you, to a piece of cake at a birthday party, or to be the only one ordering a salad. That 65% shows us that fighting cultural norms is not a trivial matter. It's a battle against one of our deepest instincts.
This all paints a pretty daunting picture of the forces we're up against. So the crucial part of this conversation has to be about the solution. Let's move on to how we can actually engineer our escape.
Exactly. And the key is not to fight our nature, but to understand it and work with it. That Henry Ford quote is the perfect mindset. The conserve energy drive means we will always default to the easiest option. Willpower is a finite resource. So instead of trying to win a battle of willpower every single day, the strategy is to engineer your environment so that the healthiest choice becomes the path of least resistance.
Okay, so what are some of those small jobs we can do to engineer our environment for success?
They are simple, practical steps. 1. Plan your meals with a menu for the week. This eliminates decision fatigue. 2. Shop only from a detailed list based on that menu. This prevents impulse buys. 3. Cook your meals in large quantities so that a healthy option is always ready to go. And 4, the most critical step, is to create a junk food-free home. If the temptation isn't there, you don't have to spend any energy resisting it. You're making health the easy, default choice.
That makes a lot of sense for prevention and management. But what about for people who are already deep in the trap, dealing with serious health issues like high blood pressure? For more serious conditions, sometimes a more powerful intervention is needed to reset the system. This chart from our research at the True North Health Center is quite telling. It shows the average drop in systolic blood pressure. Medication lowers it by about 12 points, diet and exercise about 16 points. But medically supervised water-only fasting resulted in an average drop of a staggering 37 points. It's an incredibly powerful tool for breaking the cycle of neuroadaptation and allowing the body to rapidly restore its natural state of health.
That is remarkable. It really underscores the body's ability to heal itself when the obstacles are removed.
This brings us to the final section, which feels like the ultimate goal of all this work, finding true north.
That's right. Escaping the trap isn't just about avoiding bad things. It's about finding your way back to your optimal state. We call this true north. It's the state of being where you've realigned your life with your biological design. When you're at true north, the motivational triad is no longer hijacked. It begins to work for you again, as it was intended. The things that bring you pleasure, the taste of fresh fruit, the feeling of a walk outside, are the very things that also promote your long-term health and happiness. What feels good is good again.
Dr. Lisle, thank you for explaining the ideas in the pleasure trap. This conversation gives our listeners a clearer understanding of how modern life influences behavior, health, and happiness.
Thank you, Sunny. I hope this helps people better understand themselves and make choices that support long-term well-being.
This has been Sunny's Mindset Lab. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.